May blessings and peace be with you all, regardless of your faith or background. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and like and share for more videos. In the heart of Denmark, a night unlike any other unfolded. Quiet streets turned into war zones as unidentified vehicles swarmed residential neighborhoods. At exactly midnight, raids began. Dozens of homes were stormed simultaneously. No warnings, no explanations. Windows were shattered, doors broken down, and terrified families were dragged from their sleep. But the targets were specific: 50 Muslim imams, religious leaders, peaceful men known across their communities. And yet, they vanished that night. What followed was even more disturbing. Women in the households were screamed at, shoved aside, and even assaulted. Children cried as masked officers tore through their homes. The chaos wasn't just violent, it was calculated. Several family members were injured as bullets echoed through the narrow hallways of suburban homes. Within hours, the 50 imams were taken, detained without charges, without trial, and without explanation. By morning, the news barely whispered the story. Government officials issued a cold, scripted statement. The imams were under investigation for suspected terrorism and connections to an extremist organization deemed a threat to national security. But those who knew these men, their families, their followers, knew something was deeply wrong. None of them had ever preached hatred. None had any criminal record. They were voices of unity. So why were they now enemies of the state? The mystery only deepened when no one was allowed to contact the arrested. No visitation, no phone calls. It was as if they had disappeared from the face of the earth. But while the rest of the world watched in silence, one man refused to accept the lies. His name was Muhammad Yusuf, an outspoken lawyer, a truth seeker, and a man who had dedicated his life to protecting his community. He had a feeling. This wasn't about terrorism. This was about a truth someone wanted buried, forever. Muhammad Yusuf couldn't sleep that night. The news of 50 imams being arrested wasn't just disturbing. It was personal. These weren't just names on a list. These were community leaders, men who had spent their lives preaching peace, unity, and understanding. And now they had simply vanished. By sunrise, Yusuf had already started digging. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was a man known for exposing uncomfortable truths. And something about this story didn't sit right with him. No legal procedure, no defense, no transparency. It was like a curtain had been pulled over the truth, and he was determined to tear it down. He began visiting the families, door by door, house by house. And what he heard left him speechless. The wives of the missing imams told him how violently the authorities had barged in. They weren't given a moment to speak. Some had weapons pointed at their children. Others described being forced to the floor as their husbands were dragged away in handcuffs. Every story echoed the same pattern: aggression, silence, disappearance. But none of the families had any clue why. Not one of the imams had been politically active. Not one had ever promoted extremism. They were scholars, teachers, role models. And now, labeled as threats? One woman, barely able to hold back her tears, handed Yusuf a blood-stained prayer cap. "They didn't even let him finish his prayer," she whispered. That was the moment he realized. This wasn't about law enforcement. This was about something far more sinister. Why would a government suddenly target peaceful religious figures? What could possibly unite 50 unrelated arrests across different cities on the same night? Yusuf's instincts told him this went deeper than anyone imagined. This wasn't about national security. It was about erasing voices, silencing truth, and hiding something buried long ago. But what? That question echoed in Yusuf's mind as he stared out into the cold Danish sky. He knew he was standing at the edge of something dark and dangerous. And he also knew one thing for certain. If he didn't move fast, the truth would be buried just like those 50 voices. And maybe, so would he. After days of tireless investigation, Mohammed Yusuf sat alone in his dimly lit study, drowning in files, voice notes, and fragments of testimonies. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. What he had uncovered didn't just confuse him, it shattered him. Every single imam arrested had a spotless record. Not a single charge in the past. No radical speeches, no violent history. In fact, many had spent their lives preaching interfaith harmony and peaceful coexistence. One even ran a charity for orphans. Another was part of a Christian-Muslim dialogue forum. How could these men, respected, spiritual, peaceful, suddenly be labeled as extremists? Yusuf's hands trembled as he shuffled through the evidence. The dots didn't connect, unless someone was intentionally painting the wrong picture. He recalled one line repeated by nearly every family he visited. They took him without saying a word. No arrest warrants, no official statements, just silence. The deeper he went, the clearer it became. This wasn't about what these men did. It was about what they might have discovered. But what could it be? Somewhere between fear and frustration, Yusuf realized the real crime these imams committed wasn't terrorism. It was knowledge. They knew something that powerful people wanted hidden. And now, one by one, they were being erased from the narrative. Yusuf leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He whispered to himself, "They're not terrorists. They're guardians of a truth someone's afraid of." And if that was true, it meant only one thing. Whoever was behind this was willing to destroy lives to protect a secret buried deep in Denmark's past. And Yusuf had just stepped onto a path from which there might be no return. Despite all his efforts, Mohammed Yusuf had hit a wall. Every lead ended in silence. The families were either too scared or simply didn't know why their loved ones had been taken. But just when the trail seemed to go cold, something unexpected happened. Late one evening, as Yusuf was preparing to leave another empty meeting, a young man approached him. Nervous, eyes darting around, the boy whispered, "I know why my father was taken." Yusuf froze. The boy introduced himself. He was the son of one of the arrested imams. His voice trembled, but his determination was clear. "My father found something he wasn't supposed to." He invited Yusuf to a secluded rooftop nearby. There, under the orange glow of the city lights, he began to tell his story. A few weeks before his father's arrest, the imam had come across a set of old documents, handwritten, sealed, and hidden behind the walls of their mosque during renovation. He never shared all the details, but one night he told his son, "If anything happens to me, remember this wasn't random." Yusuf leaned in. "Do you have any idea what was in those papers?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. "My father said, it's about this land, about what it used to be before it was called Denmark, about the truth they erased from history." That was the moment everything shifted. Yusuf now had a motive. The arrests weren't about present actions. They were about a buried truth from the past, a truth that someone was willing to erase people over. But there was more. The boy handed him a faded journal, his father's notes. Inside were scribbled names, symbols, references to old buildings, ancient texts, and a location. Yusuf traced his finger over the page. One line stood out. "Seek the answers in the archives they forgot to burn." The next morning, Yusuf packed his bag and made his way to a place few even remembered, Denmark's oldest, nearly forgotten public library. Whatever secret these imams had uncovered, it started there. And now Yusuf was going to dig it out, no matter what it cost him. The old library stood at the edge of the city, quiet, almost abandoned. Its stone walls were worn by centuries, its wooden doors creaking as Yusuf pushed them open. Inside, dust floated through shafts of light, and silence echoed like a warning. Yusuf made his way deep inside, guided only by the notes from the Imam's journal. He wasn't searching for a specific book. He was searching for a piece of history they wanted erased. Hours passed. Shelves towered over him, filled with ancient texts, forgotten maps, and historical records most people never even knew existed. Then, tucked away behind a pile of unread volumes, he found them. Books bound in leather, yellowed with time, written in an old dialect, but unmistakably Islamic in origin. As he flipped through the fragile pages, a hidden chapter of Denmark's past began to reveal itself. There was a time, centuries ago, when parts of this land were ruled by Muslim communities, cities where mosques stood tall, where Quranic verses were carved into stone walls, where knowledge and faith coexisted in harmony. But then came the Crusades, brutal and unrelenting. Yusuf's heart raced. He read accounts of how invading Christian forces took control, how mosques were destroyed, or worse, converted into churches. Holy scripts were burned. Calligraphy was erased from the walls. And slowly, every trace of that Muslim legacy was buried under layers of rewritten history. And yet, some records remained. He now understood what the Imams had stumbled upon. They had uncovered evidence that some of Denmark's oldest, most iconic churches were once mosques, sacred places now paraded as relics of Christian heritage. And for those in power, that truth was too dangerous to be known. Muhammad Yusuf sat frozen in the silence of the library, staring at the evidence in his hands. The deeper he went into those ancient pages, the more horrifying the truth became. This wasn't just a minor footnote in history. It was a deliberate erasure. According to the documents, after the Crusades ended, an aggressive movement was launched across Denmark and neighboring regions. Every mosque that once echoed with the call to prayer was seized, stripped, and forcefully transformed. Quranic inscriptions carved into walls were chiseled away. Where Allah's name once shone in sacred art, now stood crosses and biblical murals. Some structures were burned entirely, but others were hidden in plain sight. These remaining buildings were reinforced, redesigned, and renamed as churches. Their original purpose was buried under centuries of Christian symbolism and political propaganda. To the outside world, these were now national treasures, proud symbols of Danish Christian history. But the documents told another story. Yusuf turned to a hand-drawn map inside one of the books. 15 locations were marked, each of them a well-known church. But beside every name was a note, originally Masjid. A chill ran through his spine. He now understood why the government had moved so swiftly to silence the Imams. They had uncovered proof, irrefutable, written proof, that some of Denmark's most iconic religious monuments were not built as churches, but stolen mosques. And that revelation wasn't just historical, it was explosive. If this truth ever reached the public, it would trigger global outrage. Muslims across the world would demand answers, justice, and perhaps the return of what was once theirs. There would be protests, political pressure, and a rewriting of history books. But most dangerously, it would dismantle the narrative the current regime had built its identity upon. Yusuf closed the book slowly, the weight of the truth pressing down on his chest. The Imams weren't arrested for what they said. They were arrested for what they found. And now he had found it too. The question was, how long could he stay alive with it? Muhammad Yusuf stepped out of the library with a storm raging inside him. The truth he now carried wasn't just ink on old paper. It was dynamite. If the world discovered what he had found, everything would change. He looked at the list again. 15 churches, grand structures known across Denmark, praised for their ancient Christian architecture. But now he knew, every single one of them was once a masjid. The history books were wrong, the monuments were lies, and the silence was manufactured. He imagined what would happen if this truth went public. Muslims across Denmark and beyond would rise in protest. Demands would erupt for justice, for recognition, perhaps even for those churches to be returned to their original form. And under international pressure, the Danish government might be forced to take action. By law, if the buildings were proven to be stolen mosques, they could legally be reclaimed, destroyed, and rebuilt as places of Islamic worship. The implications were massive. The thought of 15 ancient churches being converted back into mosques would send shockwaves through European politics. But Yusuf also knew that was the nightmare the authorities feared most. They would never let it happen. They'd rather bury the truth, and anyone who dared speak it. That's why the imams were taken. That's why the media stayed quiet. And now, that's why Muhammad Yusuf's life was in danger. The secret wasn't just historical, it was political, religious, and deeply personal for those in power. And now that he held the truth, he was next. The question wasn't if they would come for him, it was when. Muhammad Yusuf knew he was running out of time. The more he studied the evidence, the clearer it became. The arrests had been preemptive. The authorities already knew the truth was about to come out, and they moved swiftly to silence the ones who had discovered it. The 50 imams weren't guilty of crimes. They were guilty of knowing too much. Yusuf didn't have an army. He didn't have a political platform, but he did have something far more powerful: the truth and a digital connection to the outside world. He made his decision. That evening, under a cloudy sky and growing fear in his heart, he took the documents, scanned every page with his phone, and encrypted the files. But he didn't stop there. Knowing that his phone could be tracked, hacked, or wiped remotely, he backed up the data on a secure hard drive and handed it over to a trusted Muslim family who had supported him from the shadows. "We don't have long," he told them, "but if I go missing, make sure this reaches the world." Then, with the help of a few close allies, Muhammad Yusuf set up a live video stream on social media. A broadcast meant not just for Denmark, but for the entire world. No name, no tags, no sponsors, just the truth. As the stream began, people across the globe started joining, a few at first, then hundreds, then thousands. Yusuf appeared on screen. No fancy background, no filters, just a man with truth in his eyes and danger at his doorstep. He spoke clearly, calmly, and fearlessly. He revealed everything: the historical cover-up, the ancient mosques turned into churches, the documents, the arrests, the silencing, and the growing threat to his life. "This is not just about Muslims," he said. "This is about history, about identity, about truth itself being held hostage." And just as his words began reaching the hearts of millions, something happened. An unmarked vehicle pulled up near his hideout. The countdown had begun. The live video was still rolling, but Muhammad Yusuf's eyes shifted nervously toward the window. He saw it. A black vehicle. No plates. Tinted windows. Parked silently across the street like a predator waiting to strike. He knew what it meant. The people who had silenced 50 imams were now coming for him. Within minutes, his phone buzzed with anonymous threats, messages flooding in. "Shut it down or disappear. You've crossed the line. We're watching you." And then, complete silence. His phone froze. The stream began to lag, and Yusuf realized the digital war had begun. They had hacked his device. They were inside. He shut the laptop, grabbed the encrypted hard drive, and bolted out the back door. Shadows moved on rooftops above. Footsteps echoed nearby. He wasn't just exposing the truth now. He was running for his life. He changed hideouts, moving from building to building, staying with families who believed in the cause but feared the consequences. Every night brought new danger. Car tires slashed, cameras outside homes disabled, strangers lurking in the dark. Then, one morning, he woke up to find his home ransacked, his files gone, his life's work vanished. But they had missed one thing. He had already hidden the original documents, and he had already scanned them into a second device, now in the hands of a trusted ally. And so, from a new secret location, Mohammed Yusuf prepared for one final act, a second live stream, one that would bypass the filters, break through firewalls, and reveal the truth to the world. They could chase him, they could hunt him, but the truth was already on its way. The second live stream went live just before midnight. Mohammed Yusuf's face appeared once again, tired, bruised, but fearless. The viewership skyrocketed in minutes. From Europe to Asia, from Africa to the Americas, people were watching, listening, waiting. And this time, Yusuf held nothing back. He revealed the truth about the churches, all 15 of them. He showed documents, architectural diagrams, ancient photographs, and handwritten evidence proving those structures were once grand mosques. He exposed how history had been rewritten, how peaceful religious leaders were abducted, and how an entire past had been buried under centuries of silence. He spoke slowly, letting every word sink in. These were not accidents. These were not misunderstandings. These were crimes, crimes against memory, against identity, against faith. People watching were stunned. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended. Religious leaders across the world began demanding answers. But in that very moment, it happened. Yusuf looked off-screen. The fear in his eyes returned. The door behind him burst open. Figures in black, faces masked, stormed into the room. The camera fell sideways, still rolling. Screams, chaos, gunshots, and then silence. The live stream cut to black. Millions stared at their screens in shock. No one moved. No one spoke. For a few seconds, the entire world held its breath. The video disappeared. The account was erased. And one by one, the IP addresses of everyone who had watched it blocked. Devices frozen. Access denied. It was as if the stream had never existed. And Mohammed Yusuf, gone. No trace. No body. No mention in the news. Just vanished. As for the 50 imams, no one ever heard from them again. Were they still alive, or buried beneath the same silence they tried to fight? No one knows, but one thing became clear to everyone who watched that night. Telling the truth in a world built on lies has a price, and Mohammed Yusuf paid it with everything.